Wake up and deliver.
Good morning to Wake Up and Deliver, episode 14. Hopefully I got that right because I've been wrong a few times so far.
No, it's right.
Is it
totally
right?
It is
Because
right.
you,
Yeah,
you
'cause I was looking for the link. I was like, where's this 14? I was counting them. I'm like, how come I can't find it? I'm like direct searching. I don't know why it doesn't come up. LinkedIn search, I think, is like the worst part. I think that there's a huge irony on the one side where it's like you've got Microsoft and now they're building in like the creepiest features ever with Copilot where they're like, we'll remember everything that's ever been on your computer just in case you hit delete at some point. And then on the flip side, they own LinkedIn that like you can't even do a basic search like an Alta Vista search from like the early 90s would probably perform better than what they do.
ask Jeeves.
Jeeves was so good. This guy had such
I love,
potential, man. And Google
I love
just like
Jeeves.
I know. Imagine though that you finally come out with something as cool as like this Ask Jeeves, which I'm curious if it would actually hold with today's current, climate of people wanting to be very like inclusive and not mean and stuff. And it's like I wonder if Ask Jeeves would stay popular, but at the time it had potential and then Google just came in and it was like, well, what's cooler than asking Jeeves? It's like, do the Google thing. It's so weird. but it
But now,
works
but
really
now
well.
with AI, it should come back. It should be like Ask Jeeves AI. It'd be like you
Oh
can
my
have,
god,
Anyways, we're gonna start off with some morning coffee, some brain food, like we always do. I searched high and far for this one, John. I didn't want to keep it the same because you've been complaining about my brain food lately. That's very
Oh
similar.
my god, complaining. No.
So this one I hope is a good one. I am very pleased to think that there are people with whom I agree on some issues and not others. I don't want a world in which we all agree. I want a world in which people feel they have the standing and confidence to feel that they can disagree. I'm interested in why people think as they do.
Yeah, see that's a very good one. And I think that that also falls in the bucket of like just super practical advice on top of being aspirational. But it's true. I actually I remember one time I had a boss and like I love this boss. He was fantastic. But he always it was like, sometimes it feels like we've always got to convince you like you're always the different person in the room. I'm like, no. I'm like, I just want to know why. Like, you know what I mean? Like if someone's saying like, hey, we should do this and you're kind of like, well, that sounds a little weird. Like, is there a reason why you think that's going to work now and it didn't work before? Because I'm all for change and trying out new things anytime or coming back to something that didn't work in the past. But what I don't have a lot of patience for is like we're gonna try the exact same thing and just pray for better results. It's like,
Well,
well,
it's like that. Was it the ninth man or 10th man policy that they have in Israel for for politics? Basically, if everybody in the room agrees on something, it's that last man's policy to do everything to figure out why he shouldn't agree. Like there should
really?
be a reason why that it's not possible. And that comes up from actually I think it was the Yom Kippur War, or the 6 Day War, where they got surprised, where everybody was like, "Oh no, they'll never attack us. They'll never attack us. Doesn't matter what the intelligence says. This will never happen." And so they came up with a policy: if everybody agrees that something's not going to happen, you need to have somebody that does the complete opposite to figure out if it's true or not. And I think that's a really good policy. Disagreeing, I think most people nowadays have a problem with disagreement. Everybody just wants to agree with everything and feel comfortable. You gotta feel uncomfortable sometimes.
Well, I think the worst, and I mean I can't tell you probably how many businesses out there essentially just operate poorly because of like yes men mentality, right? And I think that
Yep.
that's as much on the leader. Like I really think that that's the leader's fault more than anything else. Like whoever's in charge or like whether it's a person, a group of people, whatever, depending on the size of the organization. If you're in a room and you can tell that you've just got like this like yes men activity going on and you're feeling it and you're having it and you walk out of that room being like, oh, so good, everyone agreed, like that
That's bad.
that's you. You're bad. Yeah, you're bad. Like you know what I mean? Like the problem is starts with you, my man. I used to do a lot. One of my favorite stories actually from my career, because I was fortunate to have been able to bring younger people up. Like I had a lot of younger teams over the years, which was really cool. And my favorite thing was when I had this one newer manager working for me, and he was very bright and tons of potential, and he's, he continues to do great things in his career these days. But I knew we kind of really got into a solid spot when one day I sent him an email about the union, and I said something, and he kind of wrote back after a little bit, and he was like, kind of like, essentially like, hey, I'm seeing something differently, kind of like respectfully, whatever. And I sent something back to him saying like, oh, well, no, I think this, like, I think you're wrong, essentially. Right?
Yeah.
And you can imagine at my point, like, I'm a director, he's a manager, he's younger, he's newer, but whatever. And then he sends me something back again. He goes, you're wrong. You made this is what it is, and what we should do. And I actually knew right there that you're going to be able to do some really great things, because when you have that level of comfort and kind of like trust on the team, that people will, irrespective of like rank or whatever or position, and they're willing to come back to you and say to your boss like, no, you're wrong. And honestly, I was dead wrong. I actually saw what he meant after the fact, and I was wrong. But had he not pushed back again, we could have gone with my way, which wouldn't have been the best way to move forward compared to what he was sharing. But it is, the second I got that back, I think that was like a very pivotal moment in that relationship. And I always encourage people, I'm like, that's kind of like where you want to get at with your team. Like you want to have that level of comfort.
Yeah, but a lot of people have come from such toxic environments and that you can't disagree. So they've been subjugated to the spot and that they shouldn't say anything, right? Like even in school, if you disagree with the teacher, you can't disagree with the teacher. You know what I mean? You can't challenge like you used to. You just have to conform and keep going, right? And I think that's a great point, because a lot of people, even the way they operate certain things, sometimes it's just mind blowing how much more they could do with the power of no, right? Like it's no, I disagree, and this is what we should do, versus everybody like, yeah, we go do this, and they sink so much money into something, and it's just a complete failure, but they had the answer the whole time.
Yeah, no. So I agree with you. So I think that's a really great quote, and I do think that the best teams are the ones that can get to those places, or honestly, probably even the best relationships, the best friendships, when people feel that they can really exchange. That doesn't mean that you always have to agree. I think that that's something that's important for people. For as much as I share that and I live that especially in a corporate context or a business context, let's say, you'll always get to a point where sometimes if there's either uncertainty, ambiguity, or if there are the possibility of multiple choices, that's where, hierarchies or something come in. Sometimes it's like you either can't get consensus or you can't go with consensus for everything, and a decision has to be made. And when it comes to that place, that's where whoever's the leader, whoever's maybe more responsible or whatever, they might call the shot, but it's at least acknowledging the fact that hey, we had some dissent. I hear what you're saying. I understand, but here's the important thing. If you're going to then make a decision, explain why. Which is what most people also don't do. They just kind of chirp, make their decision, and then okay, I've called my shot, I'm done. And that's another indication of a trash leader.
Just trash. Horrible. Well, it is Monday. It is Labor Day. I think most people are taking a nice day off right before all the chaos of back to school in Canada.
Back to school. No, everywhere.
No, the U.S. starts earlier, right?
Are they all back already? Everywhere?
Yeah, they pretty much in the U.S. It's like most of they start in, I think, August for the most part.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
well, that's okay. Well, hopefully
surprising for Canadians. Well, no, they have today off, but they have today off. I'm just saying that the for us Canadians, it's like the school starts on the Tuesday after Labor Day, right? Like that's been it always, and not everywhere else does the same thing. And that's like the uniqueness of a fourth quarter for Canadians versus Americans and back to school. Kind of coincide at the same thing, right? We have a few topics to talk about this morning. I think they're going to be quite interesting. Where do you want to start off with? Do you want to talk about the load boards or? Yeah. We'll
get into the load boards, but first let's also just quickly share so it's out there. So now we have the website up. I know I posted it in my newsletter. I wasn't sure if you got that, but talking about labor and all the work that goes into things. All of our episodes that we've recorded, at least other than maybe the first couple where we had a lot of technical difficulties, are up. They're all up online and stuff like that. So if anyone wants to listen to any of the older shows about different types of things, they're all there.
Yeah, and then we're gonna obviously start revamping things and making it more easy to access and more podcasts like as we go on. But this is a two-man show, and we're just putting all our
And we also have day and night jobs and kids and families.
yeah. So it becomes a challenge, but we're having fun with it. Why not? Let's keep going and keep
Yeah.
improving. I think we've had a pretty good audience so far. I was actually, funny enough, I was looking at, because I did have them posted on the other YouTube, and we did have a lot of views on it, John. We had like
Nice.
40, 50 of the old episodes. So
That's
hopefully
that's a commitment too, because some of them like we really messed up, and they're a challenge to listen to. Either like it's bad audio or like bad video, out of sync stuff. So like someone's sitting there being like, the content, I love the message, but like fuck, I can't look at the screen. Oh boy, I'm gonna have to edit that out.
What'd be funny? Just out of context, down the road, this is like 3 years down the road. Someone does like a meme of how bad it used to be, and it's us out of lip sync.
AI, yeah, like touting AI, like timing and syncing and stuff like that.
They'll be like, "This is why we need it nowadays." And look at these two guys, and it's like us memed out, like completely out of sync, like it's like a foreign dubbed language. That'd be
Oh my
quite
God.
funny.
Yeah, that would be funny. Okay, so let's get into it. One thing that I wanted to get into and really get your take and grill you a little bit about, since you spent a lot more time and you have a lot more expertise in this area, is something that's come up a couple times. I've had a number of people reach out, a couple after the shows and some from some different posts, asking for feedback and kind of like market situation about load boards in particular, right? So I was hoping that we could just talk a little bit and give a broad understanding of like, what the load board is, who and why people are typically using it, why they seem so much more prevalent or popular, let's even say, in the US, and then what could potentially, what access do Canadians have, and what may be the differences. So it's gonna be like an interview, me on you, I think, for a little bit.
Well, let's kind of dissect what you said there. So you said, why did you say that they're a little bit less prevalent in the U.S.?
No, in Canada than in the U.S.
Oh, okay. So we have, well, I mean, there is so there's just more load boards in the U.S. than there is in Canada. First of all,
But do you think, but even the activity-wise, though, do you feel that the Canadian market is as open to like sort of transactional transportation that you
Absolutely.
find? Like, okay, all right.
100%. 100%. The only difference is, and it comes down to the Canadian context, as it always does, is they have different. The load boards evolve from different segments of the business in the U.S. For us, it was just all activity. We're very generalist in Canada, so it's very hard for other load boards to get penetration within the Canadian market, and that's why like LoadLink is the main one. And then you have other ones that kind of do some cross-border from the U.S. and they have U.S. Presence. But for the most part, it's very hard to unseat LoadLink as the main load board in Canada. But it's very much used, and majority of carriers do use it. And majority of brokers do use it as well as a way to kind of find that additional capacity. And I don't think very many other ones are used. And a lot of people are trying to quote-unquote solve this problem. I don't know how solvable it is.
Well, yeah, because that was that was kind of my feedback in one of the conversations when it was like, the problem, it was perceived as like the problem I'm trying to solve is, giving more breadth or other options than like LoadLink, let's say. Okay, but it's like load boards especially are a bit of a chicken and the egg kind of problem as well. One, there's like the tech or the platform, so you have to have this thing, right? And it has to be either good enough or nice enough or easy enough to use that people would use it. So there's like the core product, that's one thing, but the real challenge is that until you have a bunch of like carriers on there that a shipper could get work done through, you're not going to have a lot of success. But then also, if you don't have a lot of customers looking for loads, you're probably not going to get a lot of interest from carriers because of the integrations and stuff involved. And to your point, if they've already set stuff up and it's already working and it's complementary or supplementary to what they already have. But maybe let's just take a step back and say, okay, give everyone a little bit of a context of like, who's a shipper that uses a load board and why, and then who are carriers or brokers that use load boards and why.
So maybe that's a very good conversation because shippers are not allowed on most load boards, or at least the load link.
Okay.
It's only brokers and carriers that are allowed on there. You have to be a broker or a carrier to have status. Same as DAT, I believe, as well, because DAT you need an MC number to be able to have the load board, and that's to obviously the biggest users of load boards are carriers and brokers for the most part, not transactional shippers. So that's the first thing. So there's a few of them out there that are trying to get shippers on board, but it becomes a little bit of a problem because then there's the compliance aspect of it, right? Like the reason you have brokers on it is because they have a set of rules and they can go through onboarding quickly and properly, and then that transactional piece. Imagine Walmart posting a load and then you get 100,000 carriers calling you to get onboarded for a load. Like it would be.
Yeah. Okay. So that was interesting because I guess in the context that I've interacted a lot with these newer ones, right? Because I'll have people very often like sort of startups, smaller companies reaching out. Almost always, when someone reaches out to me, and it might be because I speak so much about like sort of like customer experience or whatever, but like almost in all of the ones that people have approached me for these new types of load boards, the concept of having the shipper included is there. So I didn't realize that some of them obviously they couldn't even go on. So that's interesting in general. But my feedback is that I kind of also agree. Like to me, and like just let me know your take here. But as like I've joked with you before, as a recovering shipper, right? I could tell you that even for as much as I love my tech and my tools and my automations and my data and all of this, I'm not 100% sure I ever would have been very interested in my teams managing activity across a load board, like sort of tendering out loads, trying to decide, pick, follow, blah, 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 whatever, right? I think that that's a really, if you're going to go down that route, I think that that's where, brokers especially who are, doing that kind of work day in and day out provide a lot of extra value. But what are your thoughts? Do you think that there's a market out there for shippers who are like dying to manage their own transactions and just not have a broker relationship, let's say?
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, that's what Amazon's doing to a certain point, right? They have their relay system where anybody can go on and they kind of bid, and they're creating their own carrier database. But the objectives are a little bit different, right? Like the objective of a lot of these recovering shippers or current shippers is to get to a zero rate gain for their own products. They're always going to be biased of their objective. While a broker doesn't necessarily, not that he doesn't care, their objective is not to get to zero. Their objective is to find... Yeah, no,
that's fair. You're trying to like, do the lanes fairly, but in a way that kind of makes sense all around.
Yeah, you're trying to find the best carrier for that lane to do it properly and accurately for the right price that profits and benefits everybody. And that might be, it's never going to be at zero. Like, it's not going to be zero because it's going to flex up and down in capacity, whatever. And not to say, like, Amazon's relay does have times where they pay a very good amount. But when you, like with anything, when you add a lot of capacity into a network, there's always going to be someone that's driving that rate lower. So they are going to benefit a heck of a lot on pricing. But the sustainability aspect comes in. A lot of these carriers eventually will get off the load boards, or they don't see the benefit of being part of that big retailer. And that's why you start seeing a lot of these bigger carriers and brokers just focus on these bigger retailers, because they have the capacity to kind of run and manage that piece and kind of flex the rate around from different carriers or different segments of the business where it's needed.
Well, so what about, Amazon's one thing, but like Uber Freight, right? I'm pretty sure that they're allowing shippers on their platform. Like I think they've tried to get into that space. Of course. Is that so? But I mean, is it really taking off? Because like I said, to me, I think it's a mixed bag, right? Like in the sense of saying the type of shipper that would want to manage their own activity, to me anyway, would seem like it would have to be someone that's very small volume wise, probably very inconsistent, right? That they don't have a lot of activity and it's very transactional, and probably in the sense that they don't get a lot of attention from anyone if they wanted to go to the market, let's say, for those services, right?
So-
Whereas someone, if they have a lot more freight, like, do they really want to be doing that day in and day out and having either that position or that in-house person tendering that many loads?
So let's maybe clarify a few things. There's bidding systems and there's load boards as well, like work boards or job postings, quote unquote, and they're a little bit different, right? Like, so Coyote and a lot of the other bigger brokers, C.H. Robinson, they have the ability for their customers to manage their own freight and have the ability to provide work, and they choose from the Coyote approved or whomever approved list of carriers to do their work, and they just manage who's doing it on a day-to-day basis, and they're just charge a transactional fee for that. So it's very much like what the Uber Freight does the same thing, and a lot of, you know, formerly Convoy, and now what's it called? Ryan's company, or Flexport.
Oh, Flexport, yeah.
Did they all do the?
I like how you know him by his first name. You're like, oh, Ryan's company. Like, oh, yeah, man.
Because it's, you know, it's. Anyways, we're not going to get into that. Don't.
Oh, I know
Yeah.
where it comes from.
So I mean, that aspect of it. So there's a lot of different customers that use that type of function to get carriers to do work. And they're not necessarily small, medium. I know a few customers are a lot larger, but they will use their own version of that load board through a 3PL that manages their freight. That, you know, like ALC, Allen Lund Company, a lot of produce guys use their platform to position and post freight that's available, that's already within when you're approved carrier on their network, that you can go and pick out jobs from them, right? So that's why it's kind of like ambiguous. There's no centralized position for a lot of these load boards, but the main biggest ones that, you know, they have their own specialties in what they do, and LoadLink is like the quote unquote the Canadian one, and you know, there's DAT for a lot of the dry freight, and then there's Trucker Tools that is far more trucker centric, and there's another one, Truck Stop, which was more like flatbed focused in the U.S. So there are these all these other.
Well, there's a couple of other ones like Freight Finder, Canadian Load Board, 123 Load Board. Like, what are some of the thoughts for you on some of these other ones for Canada outside of LoadLink? And like, why has LoadLink been so popular? Like, you know what I mean? And then after that, how easy do you think it would be for someone to come in and start jumping into that market as a service provider platform?
There are other ones. I don't think they get as much traction. It's a lot harder. That's why DAT and LoadLink are kind of teamed up in Canada. They kind of cross-share on each other's platforms to kind of get ways into each other's, help support from each other's networks, but they're very exclusive and different from one another. I think others struggle in the Canadian context because there isn't enough saturation of shippers, carriers, and brokers to go and join that board. Like, for me as a 3PL, if someone came up to be like, hey, I opened up a new load board, I'd be like, okay, cool. How many carriers you got on it? Well, we're just starting off. I got 20 carriers on it. Well, I have an email link that I can send out to more carriers, and then I'll probably have greater success than that load board, right?
Yeah, but are you really disadvantaged by not signing up and like kind of helping build the snowball?
Yeah, if it costs money, I am.
Oh, okay, I agree with you. And that was actually a little bit of the feedback that I shared in one of these conversations. That I was like, look, the only way I could see you getting any kind of real traction and getting these integrations is that you'd have to be doing all of this for free. And I think I know, like, at least for a period of time, right? Like the first X amount of customers are connected for free or integrated for free. Because I think you shared with me too that the load boards, typically, obviously, your brokers, your carriers, all of these things, there's fees, right, associated with the integration.
Yeah, and the other thing that you have to remember in context is, imagine having like I agree to like 8 different load boards. I could have 8 different tabs open now, John, and work through and check and call and validate. It becomes a nuisance, right? And that's why like a lot of the bigger load boards.
you can't say that. Someone's going to be like, oh my god, my product will be the aggregator for all the load boards.
Well, there's, and that's what that TMSs do. Like, so a lot of great TMSs now will be like, hey, your load board now connects into mine, and then you see all the post things from all the load boards on your TMS, and that's why TMSs are very important as well for a lot of brokers and carriers, because it helps aggregate that data into a single source and help you being in one window versus like constantly clicking, looking, and doing different things, and utilizing tools. And that's the most important aspect of a lot of the software. And it's funny because like most things, like the other day, I'll give you the best example. The other day I'm driving my car and I held the button for too long, and then it activated a fefeature that I didn't even know I had. I'm going, oh, I wish I knew about this feature, right?
Sounds suspect.
And then it was like just the autopilot for the car to do specific things. And I'm like, oh, I wish I knew about this feature. But it's the same thing for softwares. Like, how many people have softwares out there that there's so many features that they don't know about because they glanced over or didn't pay attention in training, or the trainer didn't realize that this was an important aspect of what they're doing, and they have the ability to do certain things, and they go off and they add different aspects to it. Like you might have a TMS that your customer is able to use you as the aggregate of information, and they want to bid off of your load board. And then you have a captured customer where they're like, oh, great, you have 1,000 carriers on your platform. I'm going to use your load board as the way to kind of get these customers. I'll just use it as a transactional fee. And there's a benefit for you. But you might not know that you have that availability on your own platform. And then you'll just automatically post to a load board, and you aggregate that data for your customer and provide a different value, which we often talk about, is how do you add more value to your customers? And that's part of that kind of way of doing it, right? So I don't know. Load boards, does it need a kind of like a revolution? I don't know if revolution is probably the wrong word. I'm sure Per is going to mention something about, is it really a revolution, Matt? People are still going to be still going to be
they're still doing the same thing. Yeah, exactly. I love Per's like, hey man, at the end of the day, everyone's just moving freight anyway. Why keep complicating it? Which in a lot of ways is very true.
Very, very accurate. So does it need a change within the system? I don't know. I think there's other tools that we should be working on or help aggregating or help doing that will probably take precedence. It's going to be very, very challenging to get into a space and getting a lot of shippers on board, a lot of brokers on board, a lot of carriers on board. To kind of do that. And there's a few of them that are starting up, and I forget the name of the one in Montreal, which is basically their motto is, hey, it's a load board for shippers and carriers, get rid of the broker in the middle, right? And it's a great idea.
I think honestly that's a lot of the positions of people where they think they can add value, is that I can make it cheaper by cutting out someone who's involved in the process today. But I think that may have a place in certain industries or like for certain types of moves and stuff, but I also think it's probably not always the best idea for a lot of people.
Well, I was going to say, and the best way to kind of educate on that aspect, brokers, I think, are quote unquote brokers or 3PLs or whatever you want to call them. I call myself a logistics architect to be extra specific.
The ambassador and the architect.
Yes, is real estate. In Canada, a whole bunch of companies came out in the U.S. too, where it was, you don't need a real estate. You can just connect with someone, and the grapevines and all these different people that came up with these systems where you don't need real estate agents. But they forget that there's a lot of legalities that are there that most people aren't educated on. And that's why we have brokers for specific things, because they're specific with knowledge on what they're doing. And it's not just grab a truck, put a body into it, and throw it on the load for the lowest price. And that's what a lot of shippers see it as. And that's why a lot of comments when we were first starting off was, oh, can't you just use Excel, throw a body on it, and cover it, and you're good to go? You could. But, when shit hits the fan and there's a claim and there's this and that, like, what do you do then, right? And that's why having a real estate agent, having an insurance broker, having all these different people that are very knowledgeable in that specific function, I still think are very, very important and are very much part of it. And shippers will learn that very quickly because they're isolated in a lot of this problems with the smaller carriers. When a smaller carrier might go bankrupt, when they have a claim and they can't cover it with their insurance, or their insurance is expired and they didn't know how to check it, or they provided insurance that wasn't accurate or falsified, and then they're they had $1 million worth of cargo. And I've had this. I had a customer, send me a load. I go, what's the value? And they're like, oh, it's $1 million. And I go, okay, great. So I need X amount more. He goes, why? I'm like, most carriers only have, $250,000 worth of cargo. He goes, oh, it's fine. I'm like, so if there's an accident, I'm only liable for 250. We agree? He goes, no. I'm like, well, then I'm not using that carrier. Right? And he goes, why? I'm like, because I'm not paying the 750. If you were willing to take that loss on yourself and you put it in writing, by all means. But my objective is to make sure that all freight is covered legally and with insurance. He goes, well, but it's $1,000 less. I'm like, yeah, but $750,000 less, more if there's a screw up, right? And he goes, yeah, but there never is. I'm like, I don't work on never, right? I work on statistically. Exactly. There's a probability, and that probability is it might happen. It might be something as simple as not even the driver's fault. It might be some idiot drunk driver crosses, hits the truck, and it goes into an accident. You're only covered for $250,000. Are you okay with that?
Even outside of that, I mean, depending on the type of freight, if it's refrigerated, temp controlled, or something like that, a reefer can fail and things like that. And if you're in the middle of nowhere, like, what are you gonna do?
Well, even knowing if small things like reefer breakdown insurance, like if a reefer breaks down, and the guy has insurance, but they don't have reefer breakdown insurance, so your freight's not covered. Or third party, you go, oh yeah, he can use my trailer, and he gets in an accident with your trailer, but he doesn't have third party trailer insurance, and all these little things add up, and that's why load boards are great, and having a community of brokers, carriers, shippers, all these different segments of the business are very much important in their expertise. Like you can't get rid of non-vehicle NVOCCs out of the shipping aspect of it. They're still very much needed. Freight forwarders are very much needed. All these positions are very much needed. I don't think you can do away with any of it. You can't just connect the end user and the shipper and the receiver instantly. I don't think yet, and I don't think we'll ever get there.
Yeah. Well, I think in the funny thing is, if you want to use the contrast to like a real estate agent, I think that probably what's happened for just a lot of people over time, right? And not because there's a disproportionate amount or anything like that, but just because there's a lot of activity. I think people have I think it's probably fair to say is that can you have a really great real estate agent that's very engaged, on the ball, helps you, saves you from potential pitfalls and perils? Of course. But I mean, I can also tell you, and even me personally, I've gone through an experience where the real estate agent was essentially just shooting over the MLS. They weren't really doing much. They never had really much info. And then they're like, hey, you're going to sign the line? I need to get paid kind of thing. You know what I mean? Very, very weak. So it's you can definitely have weak brokers and things like that have probably sort of, left a sour taste in some people's mouth. But to your point, on the flip side, the people that do their job well, and that really cover their customers well. They do a great job connecting with the right carriers. They do things in a way that everybody is healthy. They do things in a way that everything is safe. The value of that, is always there. And people shouldn't take poor experiences or less professional people as the standard.
I'll give you the best analogy that I heard, and it's and I'll call it out. It's from my buddy Brandon at Coyote, and he said it, and it always sticks with me the way he said it. He goes, bad shippers and bad brokers and bad carriers are like knives. When you have a knife and you use it all the time, and you think it's great a great knife because it's the only knife you have, and all of a sudden someone gives you a fantastic knife. And then you use this fantastic knife for the very first time, and it slices through everything perfectly. You can chop at everything, and you realize how shit you had it the whole time.
It's you were trying to do some meal prep with a butter knife, and the next guy comes in with a killer chef's
with a samurai sword here, and you're slicing and dicing, and you're going, I didn't realize I had it
could be this good,
poorly. Yeah, and then I can have it this good. And it's the same thing with brokers, and it's the same thing with carriers, and the same thing with customers and shippers and all that other things. And and you can talk about it with girlfriends, relationships, and et cetera, further down the road. But it comes down to the same thing. You don't know how poorly you have it until you have something good, right? Mm-hmm. And until you have something good, and then you realize, oh, this is why I need to use a good carrier. Oh, this is why I need to have a good customer. Oh, this is why I need to have a good broker in whatever I do, or a good consultant, or a whatever. And then you notice the difference, and you never want to go back. And that's the problem. Once you have a sharp knife, you never want to go back to the butter knife.
Yeah, no, you're right, 100%. So, no, very cool. Well, look, we used our whole show on that. I don't know, we weren't necessarily planning. That was something I was interested in. I wanted to bring up, but that was super cool. I think that this is a great one. When we'll have it up, especially for nuggets. I'm gonna test the new little system and see how many nuggets of gold we can take from this one, and maybe get a few posts up this week because I think there was a lot of great stuff shared that people should have a better understanding of. I know I got a better understanding, so that's cool. So I'm sure that other people will as well.
We'll see how quickly we can get these up. Now we're get a better cadence on getting it up quicker for everybody, and start providing better content quicker, which is always important in our fast-paced world nowadays.
There you
As
go.
always, John, take away in the last word, because I get the first word, you get the last word.
I don't have anything today. Today's going to be a simple day, relaxed, get ready for next week. But I do think that there's a ton going on in the news, and curious to see what, now that everyone's coming out of summer, the focus is, because of the fact that there has been a lot of, you see all the big companies with the heavy operations, the heavy improvement focus, like everybody being really mindful of what they need to do. And I think a little bit more of the reality setting in that it's not going to be an easy sales period for Q4. So I'm really interested to see who starts doing what and where. And I'm really going to try to focus in on those more medium-sized companies, especially because they're the ones too that probably have more of that movable middle. So that's a little bit of the focus, on top of trying to wrap up a few projects this week.
Perfect. As always, everybody, thank you for joining, and we'll see you next Monday. Cheers.
Bye.